Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Lewin, CEO of the Computer History Museum. I hope everyone is well and safe today. I'm pleased to welcome you to our event featuring longtime members and friends of the CHM community, artificial intelligence expert Kaifu Lee, and New York Times journalist John Markoff. John will be leading a conversation with Kaifu about a question vital to all of us, how AI might change the world during the next 20 years. Our programs are made possible through the generosity of our members and donors, and today we need your support more than ever to maintain and sustain the museum in delivering on our mission, which is to decode technology for everyone, its computing past, the digital present, and its future impact on humanity. Here to introduce today's program and the speakers is Marguerite Gong Hancock, the museum's Vice President of Innovation and Programming. Off to you, Marguerite.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I'm thrilled to add my warm welcome to each of you. And for this evening's program, Kaifu Lee, an AI pioneer, former president of Google China, and best-selling author of AI Superpowers, is here for a fireside chat with Pulitzer Prize-winning technology journalist John Markoff. They're continuing a conversation they started 30 years ago about the evolution and impact of advanced computing technologies. In the intervening years, AI has moved from academia into our daily lives and throughout society. Looking ahead, AI will change the nature of jobs, revolutionize medicine and education, create new forms of communication and entertainment. It will also bring new risks with autonomous weapons and smart technology shaped with human bias. AI is at a critical juncture, and its promise and perils are becoming ever more clear. So as it continues to advance, what might the future hold for us in 20 years? Drawing on insights and provocative stories recently published in the book entitled AI 2041, 10 Visions for Our Future, a new what they call scientific fiction book, co-authored with novelist Chen Qiufan, Kaifu is here to share his vision for the future with AI. His beginning point, technologies, he posits, will have a greater than 80% likelihood of becoming operational in the next 2 decades. He'll touch on questions tonight such as what AI technologies are predicted to infuse our work and our personal lives. What are possible scenarios of what might go right or wrong? How do we as digital citizens shape that future for ourselves and society in ways that we actually want to live in 2041? I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation. As is this tradition, I'll introduce our speaker with 5 numbers. 9, AI unicorns invested in. Almost an all in pre-A or A round, 3 PhDs, 2 honorary, 5,000 AI researchers trained at Microsoft Research Asia that he founded, 10 books written, 2 in English, and 50 million followers on social media. He is chairman and CEO, Synovation Ventures, and president, Synovation Ventures Artificial Intelligence Institute. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kaifu Lee.
Thank you.
So glad to have you, Kaifu. Now I'm thrilled to welcome back to the museum stage tech journalist John Markoff. He's combined a 30-year tenure at the New York Times with affiliations here at the Computer History Museum and various leading academic centers at Stanford, plus authoring several acclaimed books. His biography of Stuart Brand, entitled Whole Earth, will be published in March 2022. He's currently an affiliate fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. Welcome back, John. Great to have you here to lead tonight's conversation. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Margarita. Marguerite, it's good to be here. Welcome, everyone. Kaifu and I have been having this conversation on and off since the late 1980s when I first met him when he was a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon. And so I think it's great to continue the conversation tonight. And I wanted to start by saying that while I was reading AI 2041, one thing that struck me is how significant science fiction has been to the actual development of the technologies and how they shape and impact society. We all know about Jules Verne and how he predicted things that would happen in the future. But when I was writing a book in 2015 called Machines of Love and Grace, I was struck by continually running into people who'd gone into the field, for example, because of something they'd seen or read in science fiction. For example, Rod Brooks, the roboticist, and Jerry Kaplan, who was a tech pioneer, AI pioneer in the Valley, decided to go into the field of AI after seeing Space Odyssey 2001, and they decided they wanted to build HAL. I think even more dramatic, many of you probably know about a famous, they were called vision videos, vision video that Apple created while I think Kaifu was at Apple in 1987, which featured an avatar and a college professor. And Adam Chyer and Tom Gruber, who were the original two architects of Siri, decided to build Siri based on seeing Knowledge Navigator. So there was a direct connection there. And so I think if you read some of the stories in Kaifu's book, you'll get a sense of how the narratives might paint a path to the future. And I wanted to start, Kaifu, by first asking if you actually read science fiction yourself. Or did you read science fiction when you were growing up in China, and do you read it now?
Yeah, actually, I'm a pretty big fan of science fiction. A little more movies, fewer books. When I was at SGI, the book on Snow Crash was very much the vision that really inspired my whole team to work on 3D and virtual reality. And when I was started working on speech recognition at Apple, we were very much motivated by the Star Trek holodeck, the voice-based interface that would be so smart, and that was the vision of what we wanted to build. And certainly, I thought the Knowledge Navigator was a great piece. People should really look it up on YouTube. It was an amazing piece of work. The many speeches I gave at Apple, probably at least 50 external speeches while I worked at Apple, I always opened with Knowledge Navigator. And in the early 90s, that was an amazing, compelling, visionary piece of work. And if you look at it now, probably 80% or maybe 85% are beginning to be realized today. So I've always been inspired by science fiction.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention Snow Crash. The protagonist of the book Snow Crash was a Japanese cyber ninja whose name was Hero Protagonist in the book. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And, in the 1980s and 1990s, I got involved with a young Japanese physicist whose name was Tsutomu Shimomura, who was he was the real life version of Hero Protagonist. And I was able to introduce Tsutomu to Neil Stevenson, which was really fun. So it was another case of fiction imitating life, or life imitating fiction. So what can you say about the state of science fiction in the West and in China today? When I was growing up in the 60s, science fiction was much more optimistic than it became in America in the 80s. And I have a sense, I haven't read a lot of Chinese science fiction, but I've read some, and my sense is that it's more, as a genre, a little bit more optimistic and more in that tradition of science fiction in America in the 60s. Am I right?
Actually, science fiction is blossoming in China, and a number of top authors' work are being translated into English. I think Three Bodies Problem is the best example. My co-author, Chen Qiufan, or Stanley Chen, has also written a few pieces that have been translated. I think they are, I think in a changing society, actually motivates people including their creativity and imagination. And I haven't read a lot of science fiction in Chinese, but the ones that have been written, I think they basically mirror the society in China, which is multifaceted and changing. Some are optimistic, some are very dystopic. So I think covers both. And also, I think science fiction provides a language for US and China to connect, because the cultures and the government and everything are so different. But the people who write and love science fiction are actually quite similar. So while there are geopolitical tensions, I hope science fiction can also provide a bridge between US and China.
That's a very interesting idea. When I was reading some of the stories in your book, actually, have you seen the series called Black Mirror?
Of course.
So
one of my favorite. Yeah.
I was thinking about some of first of all, the stories are very well written, and they're very evocative. And it felt like certainly you didn't go in the direction of Black Mirror, but it felt like a nuanced Black Mirror. I mean, you got the sense that from your stories, you could go in different directions. And What did you think of Black Mirror first, and then what do you think of the idea?
Well, Black Mirror is my favorite TV series.
Okay.
I thought it's a little too dark. It's one of the pieces of work that inspired us to go off on this journey. And I really like how they talk about technologies with all of its nuances and externalities. And we have to be extremely careful. The one aspect of Black Mirror, to me, that was a little bit disappointing is that it was too black, it was too negative, and most stories end badly. And I feel that the history of technology shows that every great technology has led to more good than bad. I think we need to have a greater belief in human ingenuity to solve the externalities, and that there are many more good people than bad people, and that the governments of the world will figure out ways to control and regulate technologies when needed without going so dark. So that was why I invited Stanley to write the book with me, and he would do the stories. But many people have commented as they read AI 2041 is that Stanley's dystopic tendencies still come through in the stories, even though he brings most stories to a good ending. And then in my writing, it was still optimistic, and in some people's opinion, overly optimistic. But I think we managed a decent blend in the process.
Yeah, I agree. In those terms, techno-optimism, for example, or techno-determinism, where would you place yourself with those kinds of ideas?
I think if extremely blindly optimistic person is 100 and an extremely negative dystopic person is 0, I'm probably 70, but I come across as an 85 in the book. And I'm 70 because of the reason I mentioned, that technology has always done a lot more good for people. We have to give it time. Initially, when technologies come out, there are issues to be worked out, externalities to be dealt with, regulations to be figured out, and technology solutions that were needed. So that's the reason I'm 70. And I feel I need to be 85 in the book because there's so much negativism out there. I wanted to balance that because I feel that if there's a downward spiral for any one technology, including AI, so many people are saying this is bad, this is terrible, we should stop it, then it could lead to a downward spiral such that people's negativism and cynicism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I did not want that. And I really felt that an 85 was suitable given many of the opinion leaders are more, 0 to 40. Hopefully that would balance and get people to a more balanced view of the world.
Yeah. Just as a thought experiment, I think this appears in one of the chapters, but what would this conversation be like if we were having it 20 years in the future? Some of that is in your book, isn't it? I mean, from a technology point of view.
If we look backwards or forwards?
Forwards. So
forwards. Yeah. Oh, well, I think we would, in 20 years, I think we would probably be talking about, it probably wouldn't be labeled AI 2061. It would probably be labeled something like quantum 2061.
And I was asking about the limitations of Zoom. And where are we going to go from a technology perspective?
Well, I think clearly we'll be in the 3D space. I think that is clear. And, I've worked on VR for a long time. So I'm probably more of pessimist on how fast AI VR will take off. But even with then, in one of the chapters in the book, we have a story about the future of AR VR. I think 20 years is definitely enough time for all the devices to become very natural. So our interfaces are no longer using, handheld controllers. And also there will be very lightweight, high quality, lifelike glasses or contact lenses even that allows us to see each other in 3D and also wouldn't make us dizzy. And so I think that should be doable in the 5 to 10 year time horizon. I've talked to a lot of experts in this space, and we're seeing improvements year over year by Facebook and by other teams. So I feel 5 to 10 years is about when the hard technologies and the price points will get down to a reasonable level. And then I think the other issue is the killer app. I'm quite convinced, looking at so many 3D applications and VR applications, that the first killer app has to be entertainment. And that's why in the story, Stanley and I used an entertainment as an example, because that's one we feel clearly would take off in the 10-year time frame. You know, when I was at SGI, we tried so hard. I remember the founders, Ed McCracken and Tom Jermolak and Jim Clark, even though we didn't work together, really believed that 3D would change everything, work, communication, but ultimately 3D was just for gaming and movies. And given so many smart people for so long are still primarily looking at entertainment, I think that would be the killer app. But I do believe 20 years is certainly enough time for communications to be revolutionized. So I believe Zoom would be 3D interactive. We would feel like we want to feel in the real world. So the virtual world inside the glasses that we wear at that time will be as realistic as the real world. You and I would be on stage looking at 100+ people in the audience, in the eye, and with realistic interaction. I think that should be doable in 20 years.
You reminded me, this was a long time ago, but you know, the Computer History Museum was originally an SGI building a long time ago. And do you remember that simulator company that I think was a spinoff of SGI, but it was certainly built on SGI technology? They had a bunch of cockpits. This was like a coin-op video game, but it was right down the street from the Computer History Museum. You got in this cockpit and you had a projection system and you flew around in a simulated space. Were you around when that happened?
Yes, I was there.
I had a friend who unfortunately sort of got lost in space, and he went around in circles. He couldn't figure out how to fly it. And when we drove away, he literally got sick. I had to open the door and he had to walk out, which raises a problem for the future of the technology you're talking about. I've heard that some significant percentage, perhaps 10 or 15% of all people, just will not be able to live in the VR, XR, mixed reality kind of world because of just various biological structures in the brain.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I don't think it'll be, change all of our lives. Just like not all the people play, 3D games today. So yeah, some people will love it and live in it, and other people will stay away from it.
Yeah. Would you describe the structure of your book for the people who haven't read it yet, and a little bit of how the partnership happened?
Sure. Stanley and I have known each other for some time. We both worked at Google China. And after Google, I went and formed Synovation Ventures, which is a tech VC. And he did something much more adventurous. He became a science fiction author, and quite a good one at that. And then when I had the idea of that AI is so important, and can we make it more accessible and even entertaining for a lot more people, he was the person I thought of, and I reached out to him, and he said he would actually be willing to work under the constraint that technology would only be put in if I approve and believe it's likely to work in 20 years. I think that's a very bold step that he took, because creative people like writers don't want to be constrained, especially not science fiction writers. So the structure we agreed to work on was 10 chapters, 10 short stories. That was at publisher's request. The publisher said, it's got to be 10. You can't do 8, can't do 13. I don't know why, but we said, that's fine. 10 is as good as any. And then we said, it's like a puzzle. We're going to need to put about 20 technologies into 10 bins, maybe 1 to 3 per bin. And then he would write the story also in an order such that the technologies start from easy to hard. So it starts from deep learning, externalities, all the way to quantum computing. So that's kind of the way the 10 stories are plotted. And we also wanted it to be in 10 different industries, because I believe AI and other technologies will have a huge impact on education, healthcare, entertainment, communications, so 10 different industries. And Stanley had this additional brilliant idea that it should take place in 10 countries so that it would be it would clearly convey the message that AI is going to change the whole world and all the industries, all the cultures. And also he could use elements in each culture to create a common understanding for people not familiar with India, Nigeria, or Brazil to see that, oh, we actually face the same issues cross-culture, cross-country, and that AI would be useful for all of these cultures and countries, and all of the people would face similar issues, and we should really try to solve them. So we basically played with a puzzle where it's all these things, industries, countries, technologies in the right order came out in 10 stories, and he would write the fictional story, and then I would write commentaries on what technologies are involved, how do the technologies work, what are the problems caused, and how might we solve them. Initially, I tried to be a very engineer approach, take an engineering approach to this, and ask Stanley to give me an outline of the story, and then I would put in and say, here is where this technology should be used and mentioned, and then he couldn't stand it anymore. He just says, Kaifu, let me write the whole story. I understand what you think technologies will work. Let me write the whole story. Then you can come back and critique. Even if I have to rewrite the story, I just don't think in the engineering outline mindset. And then I said, okay. So that's how it worked.
Did Stanley have a technical background at Google? What was his original?
No, he was a literature major at Peking University, so a top school, very humanities background, and he was in sales at Google. But obviously, having worked at Baidu and Google, and have so many engineering friends, he is relatively knowledgeable about technologies.
Yeah. So I followed you on many of your the arcs you draw about the curve of technology. The one that I have the most trouble with is your belief and assertion that AI is going to have this huge impact on human jobs. And partly it's from its historical reasons. I can't tell you how many times this prediction has been made before, and we seem to not be moving in that direction. And then more significantly, when I started Machines of Living Graves, I really agreed with you. And then I had this conversation with Danny Kahneman, the behavioral economist, and he stopped me. I was talking to him about how automation would come to China and it would lead to loss of a lot of jobs. And he stopped me. He said, in China, they'll be lucky if the robots come just in time. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he walked me through the aging of China. And his argument was that China was going to not have enough people to go around because of the one-child policy in youth. And then because of aging, they were going to need more people to take care of the aging, even though traditionally the family has been. But this is a point where I think we really disagree. You really do believe that AI will largely eliminate human jobs in this time frame, the 20-year time frame.
Well, yes, I think if we look at a 30 to 40-year time frame, I think there will be more jobs available, more interesting jobs available for people. And I think there are really two ways in which AI can be used. One is symbiotically helping, scientists, CEOs, columnists, accountants, lawyers to do a better job so as to amplify their capabilities, and also doctors, for example. That percentage of jobs or tasks within those jobs, AI is and will be symbiotic. But I also think that AI is so good at optimizing, and its quantitative optimization is ideally suited for displacement of routine tasks and jobs. Not all jobs are routine, but every job has some routine component. And those that have 70+% of routine components will end up seeing 70% of the workload being shifted to AI. So I see this because we are investing in companies, and I would say 80% of the AI companies that we invest in or we look at are aiming to replace people as their primary value proposition. So for example, we see RPA, robotic process automation, is one of the hottest technologies. UiPath in the US is probably one of the leading companies in the world. And what they're doing is watching people at entry-level accounting, legal, human resources, and then doing what they're doing with gradually more AI, and then telling the big boss, hey, I can now do 40, 50, 60, 70% of the workload. You can readjust your workforce. And similarly, I think the biggest thrust from our investment angle in China in the last 2 years, partly related to COVID, is this phenomenal growth of robotics in the factories. So I think Professor Kahneman, I respect him greatly, but I think our disagreement would be at, how fast will this grow? And at our investment pace, we think it's growing rather quickly, one task at a time. For example, in our investments, we are seeing drivers in forklifts and tour mobiles and mine carts and port and airport transportation being changed to autonomous right now. And I think we're looking at truck drivers and bus drivers in the next 1 or 2 years. And of course, I agree that fully autonomous L5 driving may be 15 years away, but we're not going to take that long for the displacement to happen incrementally, because AI will become more powerful with more practice, more data, and also the cost of sensors and the cost of vehicles will come down. And driving is about 9% of total human physical activity, and that will be a 9% displacement in 15 years or so. And similarly, in the factories, we're seeing the lowest hanging fruit is visual inspection, maybe 3% of the workforce today, and that's being displaced as we speak, and they'll be virtually gone in another 2 or 3 years. And then moving things, AMRs, AGVs, forklifts, that's next. And after that will be different types of manipulation. And we are seeing a really very capable mechanical arms that can grasp objects without breaking them. Big advances in AI, but also in material sciences are advancing this area further. So I will maintain my belief that blue collar and white collar jobs displacement will be at this highest in maybe 5 to 15 year time frame. So that will be a challenging period when many jobs will be displaced. I don't know if the right numbers are 25 or 50%, but some significant percentage. And people will face a challenging transition and retraining period. But I do also believe that AI will create many jobs. It's already creating many jobs now at the top end, AI engineers, data scientists, and also there are increasing numbers of data labelers. That's a pretty boring job. Ultimately, AI will do it, but for now, so much data needs to be labeled. That's a new category. And many such jobs will be created, also robotic repair, autonomous vehicle repair. So there'll be jobs created along the way, but I would tend to think because AI is very much about replacing routine work, there will be so if you draw the curve, the displacement will go up quite a bit and maybe come down a bit, and then the creation will be a slower pace. So the two curves will happily, take care of all the human race with a decent unemployment level in maybe 20, 25 years. But the 5 to 15 year time frame is about when AI will mature and displace a lot of routine jobs. I think that will be a very tough transition. So that's still my view.
You mean that it might lead to an economic crisis or a revolution? What kinds of, you say tough transition, what do you foresee?
Well, I think there are two issues. One is if what I said materializes, it will create one big problem, which is a huge wealth inequality, because the beneficiaries of the companies that use AI to dramatically reduce costs and improve margins, that they will be creating so many billionaires. At the same time, it goes into displacement of routine jobs, and these are lower paying jobs in the society. So one issue that societies have to deal with is how to manage the wealth inequality and find tax and other mechanisms to create a more of a harmonious or at least a peaceful society without all the extreme, extremities causing protests and things like that. The other will be a transition issue. So people who are being displaced first will be those doing the most routine jobs, and then they'll probably get training to get another job that's less routine, but that will get displaced too. And that will continue for quite a while. And that will create, I think, a training crisis, a confidence crisis. Many people who feel their lives, their meaning of life depends on their job, will feel lost. There may be drug substance abuse, suicidal tendencies, people becoming addicted to VR or games. And those are issues our society needs to deal with. So in one of the stories in the book, we came up with the idea of a job reallocation agency, which is basically the government pays the unemployment benefits, but also pays for a company to help each displaced individual find a new job by giving them training. And then eventually they run out of jobs that people could hold, and they come up with the idea of, why don't we give people the pretense that they're working when they actually are not? And that's a good way to give people the training on the job, and then feeling that they're contributing, and also for the really smart ones and good ones, they will advance to more senior jobs that are hard to displace. And for many of the other ones, they'll get enough training and eventually get a real job. And there are some who just don't ever become motivated or very good, but at least they think they're working when they're not. So this job reallocation company is an idea, it's a fanciful idea, which probably will not happen, but it's a possible imagination of what could happen if we enter the ratios I talked about.
Yeah, it seems like if your administration included the priority of cleaning up the environment, there would be unlimited work to do, and there'd be no problem in finding jobs for everyone. In both China and the United States. I think separately, you've told me that Synovation has prioritized in part investing in technologies to assist the aging. And I was wondering, you talk a little, I mean, the last story has a very nice description of a interaction with a human interaction with a person, but what about technology and aging? What kinds of things are you seeing?
Sure. Well, first off, I believe AI as a pure technology should completely disrupt medical and healthcare industry, because we're entering an age when all of our healthcare data is becoming digitized. So we can really reinvent the future of healthcare in a data-driven way. We are getting our genetic sequencing, multi-omics, full body, high quality precision MRI, and also all kinds of blood tests and wearable computing that tracks all kinds of statistics. So all that data should reinvent healthcare. But at the same time, I am seeing serious conflicts between the medical community and the AI community, because the AI people believe everything is a statistics. So just let us take over, collect all the data, we'll replace you doctors. And then the medical people have sworn the Hippocratic oath, and they say, hey, every life is sacred. How could you be so crass about every single life? No, we're not going to let you guys in. We're going to continue to collect very little data to train our human doctors, because AI will never replace us. So these two mentalities make it very difficult for AI to get adopted, because the medical people are basically they are the guards of every entry point that AI may go in, right? An AI scientist says, hey, I got this great cancer detection algorithm running on MRIs and CTs. Let me go in and replace your radiologist. And then the medical people will say, wait a minute, where's your license? What happens? Where's your explainability? If you have a malpractice, who pays? All legitimate questions. They'll also say, hey, wait a minute, in my hospital budget, I don't have a place to put in a AI radiologist. So it's very difficult actually to get AI to enter the medical environment. And we're seeing that in our investments. So one of the ideas that we have is, why not first take AI to places where the medical people are not guarding the existing channels so tightly because of the cultural mismatch. So we found a number of places where AI could be plugged in. And one example is reinventing the veterinarian healthcare, basically reinventing veterinarian medicine because there's less sensitivities about privacy and things like that. But another, back to your original question, is longevity and aging. I think the mainstream medical community do not regard aging as a treatable condition. There are a very small number of very famous doctors, Harvard's David Sinclair being an example, who put forth the idea that aging should be looked at as a treatable illness. And then the AI people started saying, hey, look, what if we started collecting full blood work, multi-omics work, and also some wearable computing and full body MRI. We do the full exam annually, and then we do a blood test every quarter. And from that data gathered from many places, we can determine the healthy situation and the comparable age of each person, and estimate that you're as healthy as someone who's maybe 5 years younger or 10 years older. And then here are the main issues that's discovered using AI based on your actual data. And then a human doctor would interpret it and say, well, I think you should stop taking vitamin B. You should try to take NMN or resveratrol or a number of nutrients. You should modify your sleep or exercise. So this is a new science being built up without any resistance from medical community, because it is not truly treating an illness, but it's kind of maintaining healthy state closer to a health examination. So a company we invested in developed an AI app that will track and give us feedback. And also there is a clinic that is cross US and China that is doing these full body tests. So I've not only invested in these companies, but also became a lab rat because I'm a believer. And I have been a relatively unhealthy person most of my life, feeling that, I don't feel like exercising, I haven't got sick, why should I manage my sleep? But now that is becoming very data centric. It becomes like a game for me. And I'm a very competitive person. So, my doctor says, can you beat yourself on how old you are measured? Can you fix this problem in your cholesterol? And here are the things you do. And in the 1 quarter, this is like a KPI or an OKR. And every quarter you can set goals for yourself and make it better. So all of a sudden, for me as an AI and data and the engineer, I feel that this is a great fit for me. So I've been on this regimen for a little over a year. And then my original age was 59 when I started, which was my real age. And then now in the new tests, it comes out as I'm as healthy as a 53-year-old. Most of the work are the work that I did, right? These are not rocket science. This is how you fix yourself. Here's a regimen to stop taking Ambien. Here's an approach that you can still drink wine, but not hurt your body. And then I take all this input. I do all of them because I'm very data driven. So I feel this is an example where we're showing AI can make a huge difference. And hopefully each of these companies we invest in, we can show AI can make a big difference, and then the medical community would be more open to working with us and seeing things our way.
Right. What about home care robots? The Japanese have invested very heavily in home care robots for a long time. It's been 20 years and we still just have the Roomba in the home. We haven't made a lot of progress in getting a second kind of robot into the home. And I began to think that the real challenge was not actually self-driving cars, but it was designing a machine that could safely give an aging human a shower, which I think is a real challenge for robotics, and yet would be very, very welcome if it was possible. Do you see anything on the horizon in the 20-year time frame?
Yes and no. So first on the technology, yes, I think home robots are coming. They need to be cost reduced because the first application of robotics still needs to be in manufacturing, because these are the companies, the Apples and Foxcons, these are the companies that can pay the big bucks for extremely high precision, one-of-a-kind implementation. And as they're proven to work, they can be cost reduced to commercial applications and then to home applications. So for example, one of our invested companies is doing a really great self-moving robot for autonomous forklifts. And their technology is now being cost reduced into security robots for malls and business buildings. And then also potentially it can be the next base for the next Roomba. And we're seeing this cost reduction happening. One of the, when you mentioned taking a shower, one of the companies we invested in has these amazing soft fingers. So they have these very big bubble fingers that can touch anything, grasp anything without hurting anything. So it can pick up an egg yolk, it can pick up an egg without breaking them. This is kind of so their first application actually is in laboratories and factories and for making products. And I think another one is for warehouses like Amazon. Kiva robots move shelves to pickers, which are people who pick up things because the current, the previous mechanical arms and fingers are too rigid and break things and can't grasp things confidently. But now the soft fingers, which is a material science breakthrough, is making that possible. So I can see that starting with industrial, moving to commercial, and then eventually be a robot that can help someone hold someone's to stand up or help them wash them, etc. But that said, I'm not sure elderly care is one that I'm so ready to give to the robots, because I'll tell you a short story. One of the entrepreneurs we met with built an elderly care robot. It didn't have the shower function, but it had many others, call for help and watch a movie and buy something and things like that. But what they found was the entrepreneur found that at the elderly home in which it was installed, by far the #1 used function was customer service. And then when he watched the customer service, the older people are not using it to get help on the product. They're calling to say, I want to show you a picture of my granddaughter. I'm so frustrated because my son didn't come to visit. So I think the people, elderly as an example, really don't want a robot. They want their relatives, if possible, friends, if possible, if not, at least a human, whether it's to help them up, help them shower, keep them company, or talk to them. So I do think it's an area where there will still be a substantial human service component. It's one of my hopes that as the job displacement eliminates certain routine labor jobs, the service, human to human connection kind of jobs like healthcare services will be one that will still be growing and needed and not all displaced by robots.
Interesting, human contact. So then I have to ask you, what did you think of the movie Her? What was your reaction to that movie?
First 3 quarters, I thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was very realistic that while human to human connection will not be accepted. I think people, while I believe most people will insist on a real human connection, I also see that technologies are improving. We see GPT-3 in those examples. They're becoming more and more realistic, and also Google's a new Lambda, I think it was called, that's making very accurate conversations and all the deep fake. So I'm certainly believing that while I believe the great majority of people want true human to human contact, I do believe AI is already getting pretty good and will get even better. to pretend to be human and fool some of the people most of the time, so much so that they might like to have an AI companion or maybe even an AI lover. Not a lot of people. So, I think it's important we humans understand these are just pattern matchers. They don't really feel anything for us. So knowing that it doesn't really love you, do you really want an AI companion or a lover? And I think still some people will choose to. And I think the movie beautifully portrays a realistic possibility of an extremely lonely person who is open to such a relationship. And I think that will be a small percentage of people in the future. Now, the last quarter, I think, was just crazy. The rebellion of the AI minds that form a new operating system. I think that's where I just tuned off and said, this is such a ridiculous ending. I wasted an hour and 20 minutes of my time watching the first 3 quarters.
Yeah. Well, so this notion, you actually have a story that deals with human contact or the lack of human contact. And in the context of the pandemic, or this world that we're entering into where human contact is dangerous, isn't it possible that these technologies, if they can rise, it's kind of what we used to call the Turing test, right? It's just simply a test of human gullibility. And the question is, how high or low is the bar? And, in America, at least, we tend to want to anthropomorphize everything we interact with. That seems to be, I don't know if that's a Chinese trait, but it's definitely an American trait. And so I worry that people increasingly will live very comfortably in this, I guess it would be a faux world created by systems that interact with us that have a human quality.
Yes, so in the contactless love section, the heroine of the story became afraid of human interaction due to COVID, and then all the robots surrounded her and make a very perfectly comfortable life. And I think that is one of the downsides. Another downside is AR, VR becoming so good, and then combined with potentially people losing their jobs, will find that, hey, in this world, what's my purpose of living if I can't ever get a job that AI won't displace? I'm just going to put on my glasses or my helmet and enter a different world and live in it. It's kind of like an extension of game addiction. So I do worry that all these technologies will potentially, the downside is it will take away the human interaction. As you know, I'm a big believer that that technologies ought to push us to spend more time with people, becoming more human and value more human interaction. But I also see very clearly there is a potential downside where technology takes us away from human interaction, much as the addiction to the apps on the phone has already done for some young people. So I think these are 2 possible worlds, and I think we should try to find ways to increase human interaction now that technologies can do a lot of the routine work for us.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how distinct national cultures might shape AI technologies differently. Privacy is a core value in America, and we resist ideas such as social scoring systems, which seem to be emerging. I think the Europeans as well have sort of pushed back against social scoring. Do you think that the AI may look very different in different places in the world as a result of these kind of political values that are held in different parts of the world? Different kinds of political values?
Well, I think of them not just as political values, but cultural values. Taking many countries in Asia as an example, contact tracing during COVID, giving up personal privacy and personal data to a certain extent for gaining security is considered to be an excellent trade-off for the great majority of people. But in the US and Europe, it's unacceptable to certainly the majority. I don't know how large a majority. So that's the first point. Social scoring would be another, that in environments and societies that are more collectivist, which is that the good of the group is of more importance than the individuality. And that's the way many Asian societies developed over the years. I mean, the ideas that US and Europe hold dear about individualism and that the right to personal property extends to personal data, and that is to be prioritized over many other things, perhaps including safety, and certainly over convenience, is a difference, I think, in the culture. But at the same time, I certainly recognize the potential, downside of and the externalities that could happen once too much data is being collected and held and used. So I think we'll have to let different countries try the different options, and hopefully we'll converge at a reasonable, acceptable point for each country. And then hopefully that reasonable point will allow some optimization and opt-in and opt-out by the people. It's a very difficult problem, but I certainly don't think there's a universal solution. I'm not even sure there is a good local solution, but I think each country is trying something different. And it's fascinating to see how in COVID, how China and US have developed so differently, right? In the first year, US, well, in the first 2 months, China had the breakout, of course, was terrible. But after that, China had basically contained COVID using contact tracing, robotics to do amazing testing, very well controlled. And US had big problems with outbreaks. But now it's somewhat under control in US and Europe. People are traveling. And then in China, I can go to the US, but when I come back, I have to quarantine for 21 days. So I think we're all learning, what is the better way to balance individualism and collectivism, and also in light of the fact there's all these technologies that could be used.
Yeah. It seemed in the book one of the technological applications of AI you were most concerned about were autonomous weapons. And, the world events seem to be moving fast enough that I think you're right to be concerned. Particularly the recent war between the Azerbaijan-Armenian war, where drones became a key differentiator, I think has really reset a lot of things. And so autonomous drones are on the horizon. It's one of the areas, where strangely the Americans seem to be most resisting the deployment of completely AI weapons. Not completely, but there is language in the Pentagon has that attempts to control it. China, I think, is perhaps more willing to accept autonomous weapons and is even exporting them to places like Saudi Arabia. And I'm wondering if you see a path to controlling the technology in a way that, might make it not an existential threat. I think that's the word you used.
Yeah. I think a full ban is clearly unrealistic because most countries will see this as another arms race, and even more countries can play the game. Before it was just a few large countries with big armies or big nuclear weapons. Now countries like Israel can be a giant in this competition. And why shouldn't a country want to do that, at least for its own defense? So it's understandable that more countries will want to participate. But I think a good test would be, can we find some agreement of universally believed to be bad things that we can at least agree to set some boundaries. And also, the nuclear détente and deterrence didn't come about from day one. That the situation was dynamic. The US was very powerful and strong, and basically there was a massive retaliation strategy for when US was the number one country. And then there were actually leaking of nuclear weapon technologies to the Soviet Union, which then developed between two superpowers. And then the deterrence actually led to fewer wars as a result. And then eventually, took around 15 years to settle on the proper way to regulate nuclear weapons. I just think we should engage on that activity. It might take 15 years. If it becomes too much of an arms race, I worry there would be bad outcomes because many more countries will play the game and then and use it, and also mistakes could be, or they could be taken over by evil people, terrorists, and mistakes could be made that led to many loss of lives. And also there were some proposals on at least, when autonomous weapons should not be used when it cannot be recalled. I think human in the loop is one idea people had. Don't ever let the machine pull the trigger. I'm afraid the horse is out of the barn on that one. We're already down the slippery slope. That one isn't going to do the trick. But can we at least find something? We all the countries agree not to do unrecallable mass destruction that includes something for launching autonomous weapons. If nobody does anything and people don't start at least talking, I worry about that. And as I mentioned, I think terrorists are going to really make use of this technology because it's very low cost. It doesn't require a suicide bomber. It's now a suicide drone. It's a much lower cost that you pay and a much lower cost to build one. And it could be a targeted assassination and can be extended to wiping out the population of a city or genocide in a particular place. It's just basically, if we don't do anything, I think there is likely to be a autonomous weapon terrorist 9/11 that will take place in some country that will really shock everybody into figuring out what to do. I wish we could do something before the autonomous weapon 9/11 happens, which is why we wrote the story not as two countries, but as a terrorist group. And that will get people hopefully thinking before the terrible event occurs. But I think most likely we're going to need to be woken up by the terrible event one day.
Yeah. We have just a couple more minutes and we have a bunch of audience questions, which I'll sift through in just a second, but I have a couple more questions. There was this very striking moment in 2015, I think it was, when you came to MIT and you gave a lunchtime speech. I think it was 2015. It was really the first time I think that any Americans really realized that China had this national goal of competing internationally. And you laid it out. And it was the first time I'd sort of seen it. It was kind of a bombshell. It was very striking. There was a very large audience. And, there's still a lot of skepticism in America about Chinese creativity and innovation. I saw Peter Thiel at the Nixon Library earlier this year basically assert that all Chinese do is steal, that you don't innovate in China. And I thought, what is it? How can anybody say such a thing? But I wanted to ask you sort of, the Chinese have this goal of being an AI superpower in the middle of the decade. And sort of where do you handicap the race for us now? Where are the two countries in terms of AI technology?
Yeah, I actually don't think there is a real AI war or arms race between US and China. Most of the work being done, the great majority, is in the civilian space for corporations and profit and by the academia. And that's probably the easiest measure, is to say, how much are the AI companies worth in China? How well is AI being adopted in different types of sectors? And how are the two countries doing in academic papers? Those three I can do comparisons. In terms of the sectors, I think the US is leading by far in AI used in enterprise software, just because COVID has pushed for work from home, and all this digitization of a work stream is giving US a huge opportunity and a leadership position in that space. China is actually, I think, pushing farther ahead in the use of AI in robotics and factories, and cost reducing it for commercial and home applications. And I think we're going to see that even more clearly in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's largely as a result of China being the world's factory, has the most to win or lose if it succeeds or fails in automation. In many other spaces, both countries are doing a great job in the internet space, in financial, in healthcare, in autonomous vehicles. Chinese autonomous vehicles tend to be related to municipal, smart city, road planning, new bus routes with a kind of a state-private collaboration in building the infrastructure that makes it safe to launch autonomous robo-buses, for example. US, I think, tends to go after the L4, L5 with Waymo and Tesla. So we'll see which one runs faster. That's over the sectors. In terms of AI companies, since we're investors, I'm maybe a little bit biased on this one, but we have now soon to be 9 unicorns in the space, and they're all going to get listed publicly in the next 12 to 15 months. So my belief is that China will have a significantly larger AI company measured by market capitalization compared to the US numbers, and we'll see about that. In academia publications, the Allen Institute has done some good work on that, and other Paulson Institute also, that basically show that while the superstars of AI are largely Americans, Canadians, Europeans, the rising young stars and the large number of good papers are increasingly more Chinese. So if you measure the top 10% of papers published in AI, China is basically close to the US. If you measure top 50%, China is already more than the US. So I would say by that metric, we are seeing the hypothesis that Peter Thiel put out to be factually invalidated as we speak.
Yeah, I agree. Final question for me. Will there be a movie version of the book?
Oh, yes, we do have an agent working with Hollywood. And I'm very excited by also that not only are technology TV shows getting more and more popular, but also, content like Squid Game is really showing, international content can be enjoyed by internationally. So that means the Stanley's 10 stories in 10 countries would potentially be a good fit for Netflix.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to it. Well, let me ask some of the audience questions. The first one is, which of the 10 stories does Kaifu think are the most likely to become reality within the next 20 years? Which is the most compelling story?
Well, that's two different questions. The most likely is obviously the first story. The first story tells a story in India where something that's already being eradicated, the caste system, can come back to life because AI has so much knowledge about people's backgrounds and lead to unexpected results, even when the company building the app has an interest aligned with the user. It still does really crazy and stupid things and externalities. So I think it's basically saying some of today's argument being made by the documentary Social Dilemma about large companies, social networking companies, for example, having misaligned interests can end up hurting us. And this story takes it one step further that says, even when the interest is aligned, they could hurt us. So we got to be careful about that. So I think that one will probably happen in the next few years, 2 to 3 years. In terms of the most compelling, I think the most compelling is perhaps the last story, which basically states AI will, if we think about the cost of all the goods in the world, there are largely 3 components: the material, the energy, and the labor in increasing order. And material sciences, new energy technologies, and new AI technologies will take all of these down, perhaps by an order of magnitude in 20 years. And that potentially creates a world of plenitude that can eradicate hunger and poverty. And will we permit that to happen? Or will we let the wealth inequality continue to let the huge winners, huge haves, continue to take advantage of the have-nots? So, and then of course, the last story tells an optimistic version of that, where hunger and poverty are wiped out and people start dreaming about their aspirations that are beyond money and a good job and their success in a rat race, but rather thinking about things that are good for the society and the world.
That's good. That's good. The next question is, hi from the Western Academy of Beijing, a pre-K-12 international school. As we think about designing a future of education, what does Kaifu think are some of the most important things we can do in schools to guide our students toward a positive future?
Well, one of the stories in the book talks about the use of AI in the classroom. And there's so much of the teacher's job should be done by AI because they are routine. Giving a lecture, giving quizzes, tests, exams, grading them, drills. These can all be done by AI, freeing the human teacher and elevating the human teacher to become more of a mentor to help the children learn about creativity and critical thinking and compassion, empathy, teamwork, communication, soft skills. I think that's kind of clearly one direction. And secondly, I think one of the power of AI is individual targeting. That's used usually negatively nowadays, but in terms of how TikTok and YouTube keep sending us things that target us individually and we can't help but clicking on them. But if applied to a good cause like education, it can learn about what would motivate and excite each student. What would be something that the student needs to learn before they can go to the next lesson. Teachers can't do that for a classroom of 30 people, but an AI companion teacher, teaching assistant can potentially do that, being turned on 24/7 near the student and knowing everything about the student, their strengths, weaknesses, what they like and what they're passionate about, what will make learning become fun for them so as to spend more time on it. So I think that idea of an AI companion is one of the stories in the book called Twin Sparrow that I believe is hopefully inspiring for education in that direction.
Yeah, I hope it does. It leads people in that direction for design ideas. So 75 years ago, we were faced with a very powerful new technology, nuclear energy, with huge potential for both good and evil. Most of our fears about bad outcomes haven't come to pass, partially because of the barriers to entry for bad actors are so high. What happens now that a single smart but deluded individual has the power to create an AI winter? I think you mentioned a little bit about that, but maybe do you have more to add?
Right, and that's the question we tried to raise in the single chapter that was a little bit dystopic called Quantum Genocide in the book. And I think this is about the regulation of autonomous weapons, and these regulations at a terrorist level. I think one could look at hardware, built-in hardware that can potentially be used to detect negative use. There could also be new laws about aerial laws, about drones. Maybe we shouldn't let drones fly everywhere if they can become so dangerous. I think the first group of autonomous weapons will be drones because they work well, they're cheap, and also they don't have to follow the laws of the road, so they can fly anywhere. And there are already aerial laws about many cities, but maybe these could be extended further. Maybe we should have fewer drones for now until we figure out what to do. So I'm not an expert in policy, but I think the chapter is very much intended to raise the question so as to let the experts come up with the solutions.
Can you imagine any ways AI could enhance privacy rather than destroying it?
Absolutely. If there were a trusted entity, I think that is the issue, right? And people have proposed different ideas. In the book, I talked about one of the stories. The Isle of Happiness is the story of a benevolent and trusted monarch who brought willing people who said, I will give you all the data, trusting you will do it, use it to help me. So obviously that's maybe too challenging for many people to accept as a realistic scenario, but it's intended to put it out there to say that it's not necessarily the case that our personal data will always be taken a little bit by Google, a little bit by Facebook, and so on. But maybe there is a way. The best way to safeguard it is to centralize all of our data and give it to someone we trust. So in the book, we talked about a truly central way to do it, but there could be other ways. There can be communities of people who are mutually trusting that contribute the data in a certain way. There can be a personal assistant. Maybe the assistant lives on your phone and it guards all of your data and it decides what to give. Maybe the Facebook and Google will have to ask your phone AI assistant saying, can I please have your zip code? Here is the benefit you would get. Here are the promises I would make. And then these digital handshakes will determine what data becomes approved for specific use, and once after it's used, it's destroyed. So I think more research should go into two areas. One is how to create these trusted entities, whether at a individualistic level or a group level. And second, are there ways in which we can use technologies in a general field called privacy computing to let us have our cake and eat it too? So this would be technologies like federated learning that would allow me to license my data for the use in the hospital, which has my medical data anyway, but not go beyond it. Now, if you want to train a giant AI model over 10,000 hospitals, then the models would be trained at each individual hospital, which accesses your data, which they have anyway, and then aggregated at a global level over the 10,000 hospitals, creating a great AI engine that never saw any individual data. So I think efforts in these directions would be another way that allows us to have our cake and eat it too.
How do you see the future of AI and space exploration? I think it was Elon Musk who said that he wanted to die on Mars, just not on impact. Isn't it make more sense to have robots explore the universe rather than humans?
Yes, I think so. Unless technologies make rapid improvements, I'm not sure a lot of people would want to spend all the time to travel to outer space, because you have to, so many decades of your life would be lost. In science fiction movies, people could be frozen and wake up. I don't think we have those technologies yet. So it makes perfect sense to let robots explore the space, or maybe at least build out some cities so before we can go there. But this is pretty far out, and that's why I know a lot of progress is being made in space exploration, but I did not see it as something that has a universal impact within 20 years. So I would put that maybe in the beyond 20-year category.
Okay. I think this is our final question. In regards to educating young people about AI and helping to spark a passion for the industry, how can we best do that? How can we encourage them to explore the field of AI while also teaching them to utilize AI ethically to solve the world's problems?
Right. I think there are two parts. One is, I think AI is a wonderful tool for kids to play with if we could encapsulate it in a way that's entertaining. We are looking at a lot of robotic companies and entry-level programming ideas built on top of Sketch and other capabilities. I think is a great way. I don't think all the kids will need to be AI programmers. Just like today, all of us need to use Word and Excel and Photoshop, but we don't need to program one, right? Someone else wrote Photoshop and the filters. We just need to know how to use it. So I think the same is true with AI. And I think in using AI for different applications is a great way for kids to increase their analytical capability. So I'm all for teaching AI with Sketch and the right wrappers that makes it fun and entertaining. I think the sense of responsibility needs to come later. I actually think people who are going into AI programming as a profession should go through something modeled after the Hippocratic Oath, because the Hippocratic Oath is pretty straightforward. You're in healthcare, you're a doctor, your mistake could cost someone's life. It's obviously important you make an oath. But a lot of the AI externalities are not well understood, that it seems like I'm just helping a internet company make money, but you need to understand the externalities that are involved. You might be making people, more extreme, more negative, or taking away their personal data and privacy, or hurting people's chances when they apply for a job. And also, if you're an autonomous vehicle, you'll be determining who lives and who dies in some sense. And then if you're in robo-surgery, then it's just like a Hippocratic Oath. So that idea of adding ethics and creating an understanding of what AI engineers need to do and need to be cautious about is incredibly important. And I think that should be put into a lot of curriculums. I know, John, you're affiliated with Stanford's effort to do that. MIT, CMU, and others are trying to do it. And I think that needs to go in for people who professionally use AI in their programming.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kaifu. There's this Computer History Museum tradition of sharing a single word and telling a story. Do you have a word that you could share?
Yes, I do. And it relates to what AI cannot do. Many people think of it as creativity and strategy. And I personally also thought about as job displacement begin to happen, what are the human qualities that give us a chance as AI becomes better at optimization and doing more and more routine work. And it was during a time when I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And then I was fortunate to be in an environment with my family and friends and amazing doctors who are phenomenal, not just doctors, but also compassionate caretakers, that I began to realize that even in the world infused with AI and their capabilities, even if they began to be able to do the jobs of doctors and caretakers and help me get up and take a shower and get through chemotherapy, that is this word that I think makes us uniquely human, and it is love. It is a feeling that we have, I think that's currently inexplainable between people and people. I think it is the reason that I look forward to each new day. It's not the invention of new AI technologies, but it's the interactions with people that I greatly treasure. In my younger days, I pursued very hard professional success and developing technologies, products, making a difference to the world. And it was really only when I looked at the possibility that I may only have a year to live, that I began to realize that if I had only a year to live, I would not want to spend that year developing more AI, making greater investments and changing the world. I would want to spend that year with the people I love to make sure that they know how much they mean to me and how much I appreciate what they've done to me, and also to love them back. And I think that is the single reason that differentiates humans from AI.
Thank you very much, Kaifu. I hope I see you soon on one continent or the other. And now I wanted to invite Daniel back on stage.
My goodness, what a wonderful way to end one of the very best programs we've had in such long time. Kaifu and John have both been friends for a very long time. And in coming to the museum 3 years ago to take on the role of the CEO, I wrote a little one-page paper, which in turn evolved into our mission of decoding technology, the computing past, the digital present, and the future impact on humanity. My thoughts then were so very well summarized with the closing comments here and the wonderful nature of this program, which is truly illustrating the essence of the museum's mission. And that is that, you know, in the beginning, people were computers, and then people invented computers. And where we are right now, and what Kaifu has done in his book, and John has just done such a wonderful job moderating and bringing people along in this conversation, is to point out that it's really all about the people. The technology, the foundation upon which this has all been built for today is based on so many things that were envisioned so long ago. And Kaifu has done just a wonderful job in creating a set of stories that will allow us all to think very deeply about the implications of the work we do and how we interact in a world that doesn't exist without computing. So I'd like to thank the audience for participation. I'd like to encourage those in the audience to visit the museum website and contribute if they're so able. We love these types of programs. They are in turn fundamental to our future. So again, thank you all for your participation. Thanks to John and Kaifu. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next program coming up real soon. It's all on the website. Thanks everyone, and have a good night.